So George Lucas, the creator of Star Wars and Indiana Jones and Howard the Duck and other classics, he said a long time ago, "But for better or worse, the influence of the church, which used to be all-powerful, has been usurped by film. Films and television tell us the way we conduct our lives, what is right and wrong." Now, I remember hearing that the first time, was just blown away by it. He recognizes the teaching power of a story told visually through the medium of motion pictures, the power to affect people's thinking on a large scale, right? Cinema, you get thousands of people, millions of people, and he recognizes the influence that the church had to instill a sense of morality into society has been replaced by movies and TV. Very interesting observation. Now we have a Creation Magazine Live is a news show, it's a talk show. George Lucas was talking about the power of stories told via motion pictures. Not maybe a direct correlation, but because people learn in different ways, there is teaching power when listening and watching someone explain something, plus some visuals, lists and charts and various graphics that clarify the subject, like we do on the show. Now, CMI has done, full-blown documentaries. The Voyage That Shook the World, back in 2009, the 200th anniversary of Darwin's birth, and Alien Intrusion, great documentary there, shot on location around the world, and we other educational videos that are kind of a step up from our normal videos, if you want to think of it that way. Evolution's Achilles' Heels, it's a great example of that, interviewing many scientists from many disciplines and putting that information together visually. Now, the show's timing, the timing of the show, I think just is an indication of God's providence, because starting in let's say the early 2000s, around 2005, there was an increasing frustration among a growing number of young people, and by young I mean 20s and 30s. People in their 20s and 30s were rejecting the shallow sort of evangelifish Christianity that had been popular over the past few decades, and it continues to be popular today, unfortunately. But the seeker-sensitive fad, the feel-good, me-focused philosophy, Christianity will make your life comfortable. TV preachers and other liberals made God in their image, essentially a nice God. For example, a God who would never send anyone to hell. God was reimagined by removing parts of his character that he's revealed about himself in the Bible, especially his wrath against sin, his perfect justice. Along with that, fell many other aspects of Christianity that cause kind of a tension or require diligent study, they require some effort to work out those tensions. They're there in Scripture, and those are kind of let go of. Let's not talk about those things. Let's not talk about God's wrath and hell and so on. And one of those aspects, one of those tensions, if you like, is creation evolution, is origins, and the ancient historical events recorded by God through the writers of Scripture. So again, beginning around the early 2000s, 2005, that kind of thing, people were searching for truth. What is Christianity really? Again, I find the timing interesting. Into that environment, God starts Creation Magazine Live. It was never our intention to do a TV show. Doing a TV show was not our idea. But it's exciting, in my view, it's exciting to be doing this show at this time in church history, because there are growing numbers of people who want to work out aspects of God's character that in many cases continue to be ignored. and really understand the gospel and what happened at the cross and how sins are actually paid for, what salvation is really all about. In short, there's a desire to develop a consistent Christian worldview. How should we as Christians practice or view morality or politics or art or education or sex or science? What's the correct understanding of these things? That's building a Christian worldview. God as creator and the creation event provides the foundation for the entire Christian worldview, including the gospel, the central teaching of Christianity. So Christianity is an event-based religion. It's an event-based religion. The theology, the doctrines of Christianity are derived from events like the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus being the fulfillment of the Old Testament prophecies about the Messiah, going back further, the event of God choosing Abraham, then Isaac, then Jacob, and calling out a people for himself from which the Messiah would come, who would save people of all tribes and nations. And before that, God creates Adam and Eve in a world that was very good, initially before there was sin, as a key event in the history of the universe, a key event to understanding the Christian worldview. Adam and Eve rebel. They sin against God. God curses his entire creation. The entire creation groans as though it's in the pains of childbirth, Romans 8. But God also reveals that there will be a last Adam to set right what the first Adam did wrong. And it's very exciting. And that there will be a new heavens and new earth that will not be under a curse. Then those events, of course, are yet to come. But the event that starts the whole thing off is creation. To make sense of everything else, we've got to get creation right. Now, the problem is, so many people in the church today struggle to make sense of what to do with Genesis, right? The creation timeline, age of the earth, when did God create? Big struggles there in people's thinking in the church. The flood, and how all of those biblical events relate to each other, and relate to other historical accounts, the Assyrian chronology, the Egyptian chronology, and of course, how they relate to science and evolution. And again, that brings us back to the purpose of this show. Those struggles, those tensions, lead many people to doubt and unfortunately reject Christianity. These shows take the content that CMI produces from scientists and researchers all around the world, and our team packs that into the episodes to provide, we try to provide a clear picture of what God did, using a proper hermeneutic, a proper interpretation of Scripture, laying out what Genesis says, and then supplying all of the mountains of evidence that supports what the Bible says. And no surprise here, God has used the content in Creation Magazine Live to change lives. Now, this show tackles those issues, those struggles, those doubts head on to provide clarity and explain how the issues relate to each other and how they relate to science and faith and evolution and the Bible, etc. All those issues, how they work together. And we see that clarity changing lives. People are affected by the faith-building information that is at the heart of the show. And we see people drawn to Christ. Now, doing a TV show, it wasn't our idea. It wasn't that we sat around and said, hey, you know what we really need for this ministry is that we need to do a TV show. That was initiated by Rod Hembree after a creation conference at his church in Orangeville, Ontario. And Rod has been involved in broadcasting, both secular and Christian broadcasting for basically his whole life. He's into electronics. He'll wire stuff up on his own. And he was live streaming his Sunday morning services. He's a former pastor. He was live streaming his Sunday morning services before anybody was live streaming on the internet. Now everybody does it, but he was doing that years and years ago in the early days of the internet. And without him, there wouldn't be a Creation Magazine live talk show. Okay, so the reason there is a Creation Magazine live at all is largely due to your influence, Rod. You were the one who initially said, okay, this information needs to get out to more people. And it started with we had a creation conference at your church, right?
In 2005. I mean, that's
yes.
Years ago, 16 years ago. I realized, wait a minute, this Creation Ministries International, at that time it was called something else, but I said, these people are talking about Genesis 1 through 11. We need to get them in here. And so I invited you, you came in, and there you were doing it. So it was awesome. So I realized, wait a minute, this is amazing information. Everybody needs to know this. So I said to you, Richard, why don't you do it on television? Why don't you do it on television, man?
Yeah.
Come on.
Yeah, and that had just never occurred to us before to do. There's obviously TV shows on creation evolution, but it had never occurred to us here in Kitchener to do a TV show. That just wasn't part of it.
Regular television program showing people and teaching people about the importance of what God's Word is and because everything's different now and everybody's trying to, get into the evolution thing and all of that. But you are telling the truth, and that needed to be presented. So we said, present it. Now, I said, remember, if I said this, I said, Richard, we're going to provide all of the cameras and all the audio and all that. But when the cameras are on, it's you.
Yeah.
Whatever you do with it is what your show is.
You just kind of you provided all the technical and the personnel, the experienced people, camera operators and audio and lighting and all that kind of stuff. And I remember you saying that. You just said, if you guys just sit there and say nothing, well, that's your show.
It's going to be on the air.
So I thought, that's how it's going to go.
That's right. And you guys did a great job. And you were at the stage on the front of the church. And,
yes, it started off as a live to internet, not to tell, live to internet broadcast for 1 hour. We sat on the stage of the church, moved the drum kit aside,
and so we said, put this on live. And so I watched, and I could see people coming on and watching it and looking at you and how you did things. And I said, this is it. And I realized, you know what? This should be recorded.
Should be recorded, yeah.
It should be.
I remember you telling me that. Okay, guys, this is, we got to record this. We got to have breaks and cutaways to give the audience, so you can't just go for an hour straight. You got to have little cutaways in there to give the audience a mental break and so on. You explained the preferred structure to us.
Yep.
And
because
do it like this, do it like this.
Information that you were providing with the PowerPoint, with all of the materials that you were using was so good that to you, you're just providing it. But to a lot of people, the first 15 minutes is like, that's more information than they ever got in high school. That's more information, and they've got to think about it. They've got to understand it. So you had to pace it out in such a way. And later on, you started doing themes in your program, which is excellent. And we still air Creation Ministries live on our program. It's not live, but Creation Ministries International's program.
Yeah.
And it's still on Bible Discovery TV if anybody wants to check it out. It's excellent, 6 times a day.
It was fun doing the shows because, of course, the crew wasn't familiar with a lot of the creation argument, the basic stuff most Christians get, or most informed Christians get. Especially you guys, you've got your own creation focus there now and then. But some of the stuff was quite new to the crew, so we'd shoot a segment, and then take a break between segments and prepare for the next one. And some of the crew, the camera operators, what? I didn't know that. And then so there'd be these ongoing discussions, but when the cameras were off. Yeah. Should have recorded that.
we had a great time because it was not just the cameras, but it was also the person directing, and it was also the audio person and all of that. And I said to them, because they had listened a little bit here and there, but I said to them, you need to listen to this. And so they heard it and they started getting it. And they got it, and I remember Rachel.
So you were instructing them.
I was telling them.
Okay.
I said, listen to them.
Well, they were listening.
Yeah, and they did. And I said, you need to hear what he's saying. And so I remember Rachel. She was, and at the time, Rachel McDonald was somebody who kind of understood, but she didn't really. And she came to me after the taping, where you taped your first programs, and she said, this is amazing. I said, I know. And her husband, Andrew, who also worked for us, he said, yeah, this is incredible. And they got some of the books here and all of that, and they began to read it.
But thank you so much for seeing the information that CMI has gathered and researched and so on, seeing that as so valuable as to, and then approaching us and saying, you gotta get this on video. It needs to be broadcast. It needs to be out there. And that was...
CMI is very important ministry, a great ministry. Continue it. Keep working. Keep moving. God has got his hand on your ministry. Just go for it because God is doing it.
Yeah, and you've blessed us so much, the partnership there that started years ago. And just having us come in and here's a crew, here's a studio. Come on in, guys. You're so warm and welcoming. Come on in. Here's some chairs. Let's turn on the cameras and make a show. That was, thank you so much for that.
You're welcome.
Yeah, well, season 1, it wasn't originally called season 1. We just thought we're going to do 24 shows. And that started in 2007. And Rod and his team in Orangeville have been incredibly generous to CMI, especially in the areas of doing the show. So thank you, Bible Discovery TV, your whole team up there in Orangeville. You do a fantastic job on your own show. And you've been what has made this show possible. Thank you. So we did 24. Season 1 was composed of 24 hour-long shows. The first one was hour-long. The final shows were filmed on March 27th, 2009. So kind of from 2007 to 2009. Season 1 was done in March of 2009.
Welcome back to Creation Magazine Live. In this segment, what are we talking about?
We're talking about plants.
Plants?
Plants. Okay. Pulsating Plants is the article title. Yeah, several broadcasters picked it up, NRB Network and a number of other TV broadcast networks, religious networks around the world. There was even a Christian station in Korea that translated episode 1, just a single show. I think it was subtitled. It wasn't dubbed, it was subtitled. Yeah, again, initially season 1 wasn't called season 1 because that's all we thought we were ever going to do. It was just, here, it was more of a project. We'll do this project and we'll just farm them out to whoever wants to broadcast them. And that was it. And we sat around for a couple of years and we thought, hey, you know what we should do? We should call those season 1 and we should do a season 2. So, and then after season 2, we thought, well, what comes after 2? Well, 3 comes after 2. And what comes after 3? Well, 4 comes after. And then, anyways, here we are getting ready to shoot season 9, but incredible. Yeah, in season 1, production and post-production was done in Orangeville by the Quick Study team, up the Bible Discovery team today, and the shows were never intended to be an in-depth kind of the final word on a subject. We've got articles to go into depth and do that. They were only meant to introduce or summarize the topics that we covered on the show there. In season 2, we began doing post-production here at CMI. That was one of the changes for season 2. If the Bible records history right from the beginning of time, how do we understand where things like the fossil record was laid down?
Today on Creation Magazine Live, where do the fossils fit?
Some of the highlights in those early shows were we could get along with hardly any notes because the subjects we were doing were things that speakers know, things that CMI speakers have to know. So you could just kind of throw a topic. Okay, today's show is going to be on this, and we could just go. So that was some of the that was fun. It was basically unscripted. And those things were fun. Of course, you do run into trouble when you get into more complex ideas, things that we don't know that well, and that was one of the drawbacks of not having the content really carefully scripted out. But it was fun. Just kind of run the cameras, and we'll see what shows up. Yes, the editing software for those early shows, we just used like a $50 piece of software to edit this TV show together. It was ended up being Sony editing software from Sony, and it was just kind of consumer-based editing software. In season 3, we transitioned to 16:9. That was happening, before that was 4:3. That was happening in TV land around that time. So we moved from standard definition to high definition. And I remember it took a long time to find the right editing software because almost everything available to the low budget or no budget filmmaker was a crash fest. It just couldn't handle the massive HD files. They all said it could. You'd read the features on the box or whatever, read the features and, oh yes, it can do this, it can do this. And then if you go on Amazon or something and read the user reviews of the people who've actually bought it and used it, and it was very difficult to find software that could handle those large files. That was the difficulty. Moving from SD to HD, the software just could not handle the files. Yeah, and some of those shows from season 3 were dubbed, they were actually dubbed into Russian and Ukrainian.
Когда инженеры копируют технологии живого мира, то можно ли это назвать копированием Творца?
Сегодня в тележурнале «Сотворение» мы поговорим именно о том, почему инженеры копируют технологии живого мира.
And they were broadcast on actually hundreds of Russian and Ukrainian cable TV networks across Russia and the Ukraine and other parts of the world, actually. So that was season 3. In season 4, the whole season was translated into Arabic for broadcast in the Middle East. And the organization that did the translating, when they first contacted us, they saw the show. I forget how they saw the show, and they thought, no, this is fantastic. And the gentleman that contacted me, he gave a name and he said, this is just an alias. We don't use our real names here because of the concern of retaliation from Muslims. And so this, I thought this is interesting. So we're going to be on screen and our names come up on the bottom of the screen. And so that's going to be, our names are going to be known throughout the Middle East, talking about Christianity and the truth of it and so on. And everybody at this ministry is working under an alias for safety. So I thought that was interesting. That was a very interesting time in the Middle East at that time. ISIS was going on. Remember ISIS? And there were many, what ISIS was doing caused many Muslims to leave Islam. They thought if this, they could see that what ISIS was doing with their barbaric actions was consistent with what the Quran was saying. So Muslims were seeing that and saying, I don't want any part of this. Now, many of those turned to atheism. They just said, I don't want, I'm backing away from any type of theism, but many were coming to Christ. So this was a fantastic time to have this kind of content that we put in the show, the basic content, evidence that supports the truth and accuracy of the Bible and the Christian religion and Christianity, to have that go out in the Middle East, which is a tremendous time for that to happen. Today, there's more subtitles continuously being added. The Russian-Ukrainian ones were dubbed, but with subtitles, it's very easy to do that. We have subtitle files, and we have wonderful volunteer translators working with CMI volunteers, working all around, dozens and dozens of them all around the world, translating our resources and the captions for the shows into their language, into their native language. So it's tremendous. With every new season, we tended to group changes or updates to the shows by season. If there's some update that we can do to make the show better, to make it more interesting or whatever, we'll just run to the end of the season, and then we'll make those updates between seasons so the new season begins with an upgraded quality. And one of the big things in season 5 was teleprompters. By season 5, again, we're in season 1, it was easy. Here's a subject, and we could just speak on that subject, basic stuff, kind of basic creation, evolution that every CMI speaker is very familiar with. But by season 5, you're bringing in more and more topics that we're not familiar with. And what we found was that a lot of times our notes became so full on paper that the audience was seeing the top of our heads. We were constantly having to look down and read quickly, and then quickly get your eyes back up, read, and then get your eyes back up and kind of look at the audience and the camera and so on. And it just became the audience looking at the top of our heads quite a bit. And so that to help with that problem, and also to reduce repetition. Well, if you don't have it scripted that well, if there's less scripted, then one person says something and the other person kind of repeats that in different ways. If you have notes, a little fuller notes, and they're on a teleprompter, then you can address the audience, and everything is noted there, and there's less chance for overlap. You can actually explain points clearer if it's more scripted. So that was season 5. Now in season 6, some of the bumpers, some of the 60-second creation facts, the kind of commercials that give viewers just a mental break from the subject. We go away for 60 seconds and here's a different subject, and then we come back and we continue on. Some of those bumpers, we began using 3D models, CGI models, computer-generated images in those models, and we started using them in season 6, and then of course they've become quite mainstream nowadays. Also in season 6, we sent some shows in to the International Christian Film Festival, and the shows were nominated. That we had a couple of nominations for Best Christian TV Show and Best Christian TV Show Host. It was nice to get that. Why do that, right? The question comes up. Why are you looking for awards? Or think, well, no, we're not looking for awards. That's not why we do the show. But it is nice to be recognized, or for the show to be recognized for the quality that we're trying to put into it, and the way the information is laid out. It's nice to be recognized by people in the business, right? In the Christian filmmaking world. And I got the nomination there for Best TV Show Host. I didn't win. It was just a nomination. Kirk Cameron beat me out that year. So there we go. So for season 7, the production moved to the office here.
Yeah, that's right.
That was a big change. And the goal was for us to develop a production workflow that could achieve continuous output of new episodes at minimal cost and with minimal crew. Because we don't have a huge staff here at the Canadian office of CMI, so it's not like we can even with the existing staff, we didn't want to say, okay, everybody drop what you're doing, because everybody's busy already. And so to just get them to drop what they're doing, and okay, now we're going to film an episode, so that, and also, it wasn't a one-off thing. It wasn't like a project that we, a single project.
Right.
It was something that would
more consistent, that we could just do over and over again.
Yeah, something that would work long term. And there was a number of developments that helped make that a reality, like the low budget, no budget filmmaking world. Mm-hmm. The main one was in the fall of 2008, the Canon 5D Mark II. That was one of kind of 3 major things that made it possible for us to have a studio here and do this. In the fall of 2008, Vincent Laforette borrowed a prototype Canon 5D Mark II for the weekend, and he shot Reverie, this short film, and it blew his mind when he saw he's a photographer for National Geographic and other things, but when he saw the video coming out of the Canon 5D is still one of the world's top stills cameras, mm-hmm. and video coming out of that. I mean, nowadays every still camera shoots video, but back then it was a big deal. He was blown away by the quality of the image. It looked like it was shot on film. The size of the sensor, the way it captures light,
and interchangeable lenses.
Interchangeable lenses with the right settings.
Huge deal.
Yeah, you can make it look like a cinema camera. And here was this camera that was the list price, I think, was like $2,700. And what were the prices of movie cameras back then?
Even many digital cinema cameras nowadays are in the 100,000 range. When you talk about Arri Alexas and even Red cameras can be in the tens of thousands. So even by today's standards, it was incredibly cheap to shoot digital film-like footage.
Yeah, so to have that would have been right there. That would have been, nope, we're not. We're going to continue shooting in Orangeville, and they've got the setup there. They've had it for years, and so that would have been out of the question had that not happened. So that was a major thing. And then the transition from film to digital was happening right around that time. The 5D Mark II was the first DSLR, digital SLR camera to shoot in full HD. There were other DSLRs. Nikon had one that shot 720, but the 5D was the first one that had 1080, 1080p, full HD
footage.
Yeah, that was a huge thing. The transition from film to digital, and then the third one was YouTube.
Yeah,
right.
There
was a way for no budget or low budget filmmakers to distribute their work.
Right, because even with the rise of indie film in the 90s and such, they still needed a distributor to buy the film and make DVDs and VHS back in those days, and sell it in stores, right? So that your film would be seen by people, or make copies and sell it to theaters. Like that, for it to get to an audience, there had to be a distributor. But YouTube kind of became a distributor for people with no budget, for anybody who wanted to make digital content.
Right. Yeah. I mean, you put it out there for free.
Right.
But
but
still,
exactly.
for a low budget, no budget filmmaker, that's an avenue that became an avenue of distribution.
Right.
YouTube started in 2005, was bought by Google in 2006. Now there's a way for the low budget filmmaker to showcase their work, and then after that, a few TV shows started shooting on the 5D, and then it went from there. And then we started thinking here at CMI, hey, with those things in place, we could build a studio at our office.
Yeah.
There's a way to distribute it, and it was meant for TV broadcast. Anyways, the intention was to distribute it to established TV broadcasters, religious broadcasters.
Right. And for the first 6 seasons of Creation Magazine Live, we were going to a studio and shooting a bunch of episodes in just one day, which can just be a lot of headache and preparation. And this way, it just made a lot more sense to have a studio here that we could just shoot any video at any time, that just a few episodes at a time, not have to cram everything into one day.
Yeah, I remember shooting some of those. Like by the time we'd shoot 6 episodes in a day, right, and go up there 4 times a year. That would give us our 24 episodes. And sometimes by the end of the day, you're just bleary-eyed and sort of.
Right.
It was rough to keep the energy up, to keep going.
So 2 hours of driving in a day with shooting 6 episodes.
Yeah, it was pretty grueling, but hey, it worked for a time. But
it's just inconvenient and limited our ability to pump out more videos.
Right. Yeah, and so that was one of the big advantages to shooting here.
Right. To moving here, it made a lot more sense that we could just go down to the studio anytime we wanted to shoot something.
And then the technology had moved to a point where it was possible for a small budget to shoot it with high quality, not with video cameras, the old camcorder
or
days.
Webcams or
webcams,
anything like that.
Back in the day. Then it became, how do we build a studio? How do we do that? And with YouTube and so on, there was a huge amount of learning that we had to do. How to build a studio, evaluating all the different possibilities for shooting, which one would work for us. There's hundreds of different ways that you can pull this off.
That's right. Yeah.
But what's going to work for the show? What's going to be best, and what's going to meet those goals of having continuous production with minimal crew, and at a budget that Canadian supporters can make it happen.
Right.
And initially the original plan was a physical set, and so we were learning, set construction, lighting, cameras, lenses, green screen. We knew we wanted to do some green screen work, and how to light a green screen, audio, how to get good audio, and teleprompters. And we were using teleprompters in season 5 and 6. And so we can build our own teleprompters, or do we DIY it, or do we buy something? Or it was all this research, weeks and weeks of really watching videos and reading articles on how other low budget filmmakers had built their studios. Months of time. And again, the original plan was to build a physical studio, and so we moved some shelving around in our warehouse. We built a lighting grid, and we had some hoists, some chain hoists that we attached to the ceiling. and the ceiling of the warehouse there. So it could be, the lighting grid could be raised and lowered to work on it. It was convenient in that way. A CMI supporter who specializes in doing electrical work within the film industry in Toronto, and also he travels all around the world. But he designed and built the electrical system and all of the cabling to power the lights and stuff. And he got us a good lead on used lighting at a place in Toronto there. So we were up and running with his expertise. That was really, really handy in the early days there. And then we were also thinking with a minimal crew to have automated cameras. We were looking at motorized dollies that would move the camera automatically back and forth, and we can move those around here and there.
Right. Yeah.
All thinking about a physical set.
Right.
Yeah.
Then we wouldn't need as many camera operators and get away with a smaller crew.
That was the idea. Yeah. Yeah, less camera operators. And we built a green screen, including a cyclorama wall, and lit it as evenly as possible. We wanted the capability to use green screen, but we installed black curtains to cover the green screen. We could pull those in front of the green screen when shooting Creation Magazine Live, which would be a physical set. But we didn't end up shooting on a physical set.
No, we didn't.
So we moved to a green screen set and a virtual set in the computer. The challenges and the reasoning behind that was it took a long time.
Yeah.
You were very involved in that, but there are challenges with the physical set.
Right.
With a physical set, you've got, we'd pick the furniture and you'd build a set like a traditional set. And then you'd be up in the lighting grid and on ladders and lighting it, you'd light everything carefully. And then if you want to, okay, well, a scientist is coming through town. We want to interview a scientist, and if we have an interview set, well, then you take all of your physical furniture out of your Creation Magazine Live set and put in the interview furniture, and then you need to relight it.
That's right.
Everything's moved around, and where do you put the furniture then? We don't have a lot of space here. Where do you store the furniture? And then furniture gets dusty, it gets dinged up as you move it around and stuff.
Right.
So there are challenges.
Yeah, and that was the original plan, was to do all that.
That was the plan, yeah.
But I started playing around, like, mostly for the animations and stuff we do, like with 3D, and trying to just do some stuff with that. And I realized, like, that, like, physically based rendering is becoming more attainable, especially even just on desktop hardware, which is mostly what we use.
Yeah.
And so it seemed to be like, hey, I think we can do a realistic virtual set here that we can just do completely in the computer and completely control all of that with furniture and lights and all of that, virtual cameras. So
virtually. So no physical furniture.
Nothing physical, not a physical model, just completely in the computer.
Yeah. And that took a long time to kind of change, because we were on this track of, we're going to have a normal set that you would light. That's right. That you would light it, and that would be our set.
Yeah.
And it took a long time. And I remember you kept coming into my office and look at this piece of software here. Look at what this can do. And you're always up on the latest kind of technology there. And
nothing's changed.
Nothing's changed. Yeah.
And so you were kind of skeptical about going that way, because once we are committed to doing that, then we're committed to doing that.
Well, yeah.
So and I was just learning all this, so it seemed kind of like, I don't know if we should,
And I mean, I was locked into, because that's what you're traditionally used to, a physical set.
Right.
That's what we had for the first 6 seasons. You go and shoot on a physical set. And
right.
So there was.
And the biggest question was, can it be good enough that people won't notice the difference? That was really the big question. We didn't want to do the cheesy 3D that's been
that everybody does,
those 90s visual effects.
I mean, and with the budget that we had, with what our Canadian donors supply to the ministry, we have to work within that. And I mean, we're taking faith steps here, and we're saying, we'd like to do this. We wanted to do, the highest quality that we can with what we have. And we researched all the challenges with green screen. I mean, what might we encounter that we haven't thought of? And again, you look to those who've gone before you, the DIY filmmakers that have built sets and have good output. So one of the things that I wasn't interested in. This was kind of the to get us over the hill and to, yes, we're going to do a virtual set, was moving cameras. I wasn't interested in having, a couple or three stationary cameras and the camera doesn't move and you're just there's you key out the background and there's your background and have maybe a couple different angles. But it was moving cameras in a virtual set.
Which always makes, when you have the camera moving, it always makes the shots more dynamic, more interesting, more
it's on a completely different
engaging.
level. Yeah,
that's right.
And it's not just more visually engaging. It sells the idea that you're actually in a real studio.
Right.
It just sells that idea. You have the parallax of
It's
moving
not
back
just
and forth and so on.
a stock photo you got.
Yeah, which
from the
everybody
internet or
does,
something.
and everybody can see. Everybody's been
That's
done,
right.
done a million
It's been
times.
done a million times.
So 1993, ILM, the Industrial Light and Magic, they won an Oscar. This is for cutting edge special effects and CGI dinosaurs for Jurassic Park, the original Jurassic Park, and that kind of technology that won them an Oscar back in 93 can now basically be done on a PC.
Yeah.
That's what it's the idea of what they had was dinosaurs running through a scene, and the camera was not fixed. It was moving around, and the CGI characters, the dinosaurs, were in that scene running across the ground with a camera that's in the back of a Jeep going backwards, and that was just incredible. That was cutting edge back
Completely
then.
following the motion of the camera.
Following the motion of the camera. Based on what ILM was doing with dinosaurs there, we got a dinosaur model, CGI dinosaur, and we tried a bit of that camera tracking just with a handheld camera walking up on the mezzanine and
Just as a test.
just as a test. Yeah.
See if that was possible.
All right, now out here, this is our warehouse. This is obviously where we keep the books and DVDs. And on the mezzanine here, we have our lunch. And this is also where we keep our dinosaurs. Hey, Winston. The neighbors really don't like that. Couldn't get the dinosaur to move correctly,
No,
but
no.
but it was just an interesting experiment to push the technology that we could use, not some special effects house in Hollywood,
Right.
but that we could use. What could we do here in house?
Right.
And
without needing a bunch of animators or something like that.
right.
So we were asking the question, how could we not have to move the cameras when we're shooting the episodes, but
Because
still have
we don't have the people to have every camera be manned.
right?
To have
and we
camera
tried
operators.
some like motorized systems. Nothing like that really worked for what we needed.
Right.
So how can we have the cameras moving in the final episode without having to have all these camera operators? And our solution to that was the virtual set.
Yeah.
Because in a virtual set, you can have a virtual camera, not a physical camera, a camera that's in the 3D environment that we've created in the computer that can move around freely in the 3D environment we've made.
In the computer.
In the computer,
Yes.
that's right.
But the cameras in production, the cameras on the set do not move.
What we do is we have still cameras when we're shooting the production, us on the green screen, the hosts on the green screen, and then we take that green screen footage, take out the green background, and then put them like as if they're a card on the 3D set, and then have the virtual cameras in the computer moving so that it looks like the hosts are in a set with moving cameras, even
Right.
though physically nothing's moving. It's just the virtual cameras in the virtual set in the computer,
Virtual set.
the digital set, that are moving, and no cameras on the physical set are moving.
Pretty cool, huh?
In the virtual set, as you can see here, we have a full 3D computer graphics model of our set that we can just move around freely. As you can see here, we can just move around anywhere we want in the computer, and there's our desk, fully 3D. So if you think about it, like here we have a monitor that's a 2D plane, right? There's nothing 3D about this image you're seeing here, but this is essentially a camera. because we're viewing this 3D object that's in the computer from a certain angle at a certain focal length too. And every aspect you have about a camera, sensor size even, would be the size of the monitor. So you have all those aspects of a camera that it's just the 2D angle that you view the 3D objects in the set. And so you can do that virtually and do it from any angle. So here I would be essentially moving the camera because I'm navigating around this 3D set, but from a 2D perspective, which is essentially what a camera does. It captures the 3D world that we live in and puts it into a 2D image in a photo or a video. There aren't limits in how far the camera can move in the virtual set. There are limits how you can move with the hosts in the set, because the hosts, remember, are seen by the computer as just a 2D card, if you will, inside a 3D environment. So there's many tricks you can do. You can bend the card so that when the camera moves, it has a bit more depth to it, that is. And so you have more freedom in that way, but there are limits. You can't rotate around the hosts too far, or else it starts to show that it's just a card, not actual 3D human beings, if you will. And so, I mean, there's plenty of tricks that you can do to help, but they do have limits.
I mean, building the set was really, really interesting and fun. Just exploring all the different, like, since we're doing this set virtually, like, what's all the, like, different items and furniture and stuff we can add here. And what was really neat about it, too, is an aspect that not many people think of, but, like, to build a set like that, we would need to spend a lot more than we would with a virtual set. A virtual set takes more time, probably, to render and to maybe prepare it. But in the long run, to buy these 3D models that are put into the virtual set are much cheaper than if you were to buy a physical replica of the same item, right?
Yeah.
And then not even counting like maintenance and anything else that would be associated, or cleaning.
Yeah, and if you want to change your set, you just have another virtual set.
Yeah, that's right. And you can tweak the lighting any way you want, because they're virtual lights, not physical lights like you would have. You don't have bulbs burning out. You don't have any of the challenges of physical
maintaining
or cost.
physical, like furniture and all the other paraphernalia that's involved, lights and everything else that you need to in a physical set.
Yeah, so I mean, that's something maybe people don't realize is how much money the ministry saved by going virtually instead of building a physical set.
Yeah, like for example, our set is located in a beautiful 19th century estate just outside of town. You can see it out the countryside out the windows there. Marble floors, wall-to-wall bookshelves, a suit of armor in the back corner there, a life-size T-Rex skull. There's this ornate, really, really cool antique desk. There's a large fireplace and some beautiful leather wing-back chairs there, a Tiffany lamp between them, and this amazing vaulted ceiling, these incredible chandeliers hanging from there. For example, the fireplace set, the mirror, the lights there, that whole fireplace set was $49. That massive antique Baroque desk in the back corner there was $55. Like, that would be... The ministry can't afford it if we're having a physical set. I mean, obviously you can't afford stuff like that.
And not only that, but like to think of the flexibility it being virtual gives us. So once you have the model, you can texture it and shade it any way you like, you can
augment it, you can change it.
Yeah,
right?
It can be a marble floor, or it could be like a hardwood floor, a carpet floor. Like we can literally change that any way we want. And so buying these models isn't just like you have to buy it the way you want, and then it's extra cost if you want to modify it at all. We can do any of that.
Right.
Just with having that model.
Yeah, it's very flexible. And it doesn't get old. It doesn't get dusty.
Right. Yeah.
Doesn't need cleaning.
Yeah.
You shine it up once and it's good
very
to go forever.
Easy to move around.
Very easy to move around, yeah. And it's economical, right? $55 for that desk. The suit of armor was $15.
Yeah. Yeah.
So just incredible.
Less than
And
$20.
yeah, less than $20 for a suit of armor.
For a suit of armor,
incredible.
yeah.
And the design philosophy and the idea behind the set is that it features antique, solid, classic pieces there. It's an old set, again, like a 19th century estate. You get that kind of idea there with the dark wood and the bookshelves and so on, and yet the desk that the hosts sit behind is very modern.
Yeah.
And so the idea is there, it's Genesis, the Bible, Christianity, which is classic, which is old, which has staying power, which is solid, and so on.
But not millions of years old.
But not millions of years. And then we're bringing modern science and cutting-edge science to support what the Bible says. And that's the design philosophy behind the set. So you've got this beautiful,
right.
Rich-looking old set. Christianity is not new. It's been around for, since the beginning of time.
Yep.
And in various forms. And then you've got this cutting-edge science, and that's what the desk represents there. Now, not everything in the set has meaning, in case you're wondering. Some stuff is just there because it's cool.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and that was another. I mean, with the virtual set, we could just try things, like just throw in that model and see what it looks like. Some things you really don't know. Like, it can look like it'll fit on its own, but then when you put it in there and stuff, that doesn't really work, or we would need to change this about it, or that doesn't match the color scheme. These are all typical objections that are raised in physical sets. So being able to do that virtually saved us so much time and expense.
Right.
And just manpower.
Yeah. And we put there was a bit of a throwback to the old set and so on the mantelpiece of the fireplace. You'll see a picture of a portrait of Dr. Carl Wieland, who's kind of the grandfather of the ministry. So there's a bit of
as well as the old set
and the old set.
That's right.
A still shot of the old set up in Orangeville, which is cool. And then the desk. We had to build the desk for the set, the green screen desk that the hosts sit behind, and that the curvature on the desk, had to exactly match the curvature of the 3D virtual desk.
Right. So that the hosts looked like they were sitting at the virtual desk.
Yeah, yeah. Well, one of our supporters, a person who likes the show, is from Texas, and he's in the he knew we were on a green screen set because he's in the business and broadcasting and so on. But he was surprised to learn that the desk was also a CGI model.
Wow.
So I thought, yes, we pulled it off. Are we being deceptive? Well, we don't want to. We're not trying to be deceptive as a ministry.
No,
but we got this set, and we're trying to make it look as real as possible.
Right.
No, we're not being deceptive. I mean, we might be tricking people into thinking that it's a real set, but that's kind of the point. But deception, presupposes malice, right? We're not maliciously deceiving people. We're just using the tools that are commonly used now in the industry to the smoke and mirrors, right? That's the typical Hollywood phrase, because it's to use these tools that we have at our disposal to then increase our production value and to save money ultimately, which isn't malicious at all. It's good stewardship to use these tools that we can then create better content for cheaper that looks great, that requires only a fraction of the budget. One of the only downsides of doing the set this way, right, is because it requires more post-production time. So instead of having an expense of building a studio, taking the time to physically build a studio and that monetary expense, you have more time expense in terms of instead of just having ready to go footage that has the studio and everything built into it already, we have to then take out the green screen background, We have to render it with the new background in and do all the compositing work that makes it look like it's actually in the background there. And so it requires that extra work. And so what we'll typically do is we'll edit the footage with just the green screen so that we get the content and the outline right. So we don't need to do the post-production visual effects on more footage than we need to. And then we'll typically add in the visual effects once we get the outline locked and the edit locked, as we say. We'll add in the background of the studio, which then will be rendered out on its own so that we have the final footage, which would be what you would just typically get from the camera on a physical set. So it does have some extra steps, but in the long run, I think we're coming out ahead. We were editing before in Premiere Pro, and so it just made sense to use After Effects as our visual effects software. And so we do our keying and compositing in there. But there were some problems with just even efficiency with render times. After Effects would take a long time to render because it's primarily CPU based, that it'll mainly use the CPU of the computer, the central processing unit of the computer to render out the frames of the keyed footage with the background, which was just taking quite a long time because CPUs are good for many things, but they're not the fastest in terms of rendering. So we were keeping an eye on DaVinci Resolve by Blackmagic Design and Fusion by Blackmagic Design. One step in software technology that really kind of made us perk our ears up was when they included Fusion in Resolve, when they built Fusion into Resolve, which really changed the game. Fusion would be the After Effects of Blackmagic Design's product offerings. So, and DaVinci Resolve, which has typically been a color grading software, had been putting in some great editing capabilities that really matched and then eventually exceeded Premiere Pro's ability in editing. So, and a huge factor in that was that DaVinci Resolve and Fusion, the compositing software that now comes built into DaVinci Resolve, are all GPU based, which is a lot more powerful and a lot faster in terms of renderings and even just working with footage. In terms of, especially with high resolution footage, it was a huge boost in our productivity that we can now just edit in real time with our high resolution files and then do our visual effects in the same software without having to use some kind of quirky dynamic link that doesn't work as well and is very slow. But so we increased our efficiency a lot with that. So when we saw that DaVinci Resolve was putting their compositing software Fusion into DaVinci Resolve itself, that really made us take notice that DaVinci Resolve might be a good alternative to Premiere Pro and After Effects, as we were having a few different issues with speed and with just efficiency in terms of long render times and just not the best workflow with After Effects and Premiere Pro. So then we made the jump and we switched over in season 8 to DaVinci Resolve, and with each product release it's gotten better and faster and it's more economical actually than Premiere Pro and After Effects. So it's really a better solution for what we're doing here, especially with our small team, that we can then just have graphics cards put into our systems that do our rendering, and then we don't need some big kind of render farm to be able to render these high resolution files that are then used in keying as well as compositing, and it can really bog down a system that isn't equipped with a massive computing power. But so the rise of GPU rendering has made it a lot more possible and both the compositing as well as the 3D side of things. When we have the 3D set here and we're rendering it out to 2D frames, that was taking a long time when we initially started, because we were using CPU rendering, because that was really all that was available at the time. But now with GPU rendering, it's so much faster that we can render out stuff so much quicker, as well as when we edit and composite it. Using GPU just makes those types of workflows so much more accessible on just desktop computers, that we don't need some kind of big computing server to be able to play these files in real time. And so that's now our software we're using to edit the shows. When we were first building the virtual set and when we were first rendering it out, we were just using CPU only. So what we do is we had a little render farm in the office here that would just use some CPU cores from different workstations around the office when they weren't being used. But also we couldn't, it would bog down not only other people's machines, but our main editing machine would be completely bogged down when it was rendering with a CPU. And so it was very limiting, because we'd have to either stop or pause rendering during the day when we were trying to get work done, and then we'd have to resume it in the night, and it just took a long time to render out various frames. And then in terms of like editing, we couldn't play the footage back in real time at full resolution. So there was just a number of limiting factors with that.
So, and to generate some of these camera moves in the virtual set, the camera moves in the virtual set through whatever path we want it to, and we need to render out all of those positions. So every frame is rendered out, all the how the light bounces around all the objects and so on and enters the virtual camera.
Right.
Has to all be rendered out.
That's 30 frames a second that we shoot in on our cameras, and we need to render out then 30 frames per second of the camera move.
Yeah, so we had that 1 30-second move on camera 2.
Right.
So it was 30 seconds times 30 frames a second. That's 900 frames. And some of those frames took some of our computers 8 hours to render. So we had 900 frames, 8 hours a frame for the slower computers. The faster ones did it in about an hour.
Right.
But it took months and months to render out that camera move. We built a bit of a render farm. That was cool, figuring out how to do that with all of the workstation computers that all the rest of the staff are working on. When they weren't using them, like on weekends and overnight, they would be brought into the render farm where all the computers would work together to render out frames. And so we had our whole office here working on rendering this
render
but
farm.
That's obsolete now, right?
Yeah, because now where we're moving is where the industry and technology and software is moving is GPU render. Which uses the graphics processing part of the computer, which is much faster, but has been historically more inaccurate. It's not like GPUs are new, but they're just getting to such a state that they can render much quicker than CPUs, which is the main brain of the computer, and in a fraction of the time.
So like if people want to think of so CPUs tend to have cores in them, right? So they have one core, which is essentially one brain that is thinking, or two cores, which two brains thinking simultaneously, so it can multitask them better. And then 4 cores, 16 cores, 32 cores, and that's where you get into ranges that normal people don't have computers in with that many cores. But with GPUs, it's not a one-to-one equivalent, but it really takes advantage of multi-core processing. So where you can have 32 and 64 cores on a CPU, that can really enhance your multi-threaded performance, which is just basically multitasking that the computer can carry out many processes at once. With GPUs, they're not quite, each core is not equivalent to a CPU core, but they can be in the range of 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 cores. And depending on the GPU, again, this isn't even consistent across different types of GPUs, but that is one way to think about it, is that they're just, instead of a few really fast cores, there are many slower cores, but it uses that many to complete little tasks very quickly. Another thing about GPUs is that they're optimized for graphics, which, like, if you think about, like, if you're playing a video game, say, like, a good graphics card will help you out because it's designed to process 3D models, visual frames, video frames. And so what can be done is like, even gaming cards like that can be taken advantage of, that they can, as they help video games produce video frames as well as process 3D models and textures, etc. They can also be used to process videos that are being edited or 3D models that are being rendered, that they have that speed that they were designed for this very specific task. Because GPUs can't be used for like everything, but for these specific tasks, they're far better than CPUs. It's just a lot more expandable too, because you can buy computers that can have 3, 4 or more GPUs running at the same time too. So you can multiply it that way with software that can take advantage of that, like DaVinci Resolve, which is what we use here. When we switch to Resolve, like, things could just play in real time, because GPUs these days are just so accessible, because you can, for not very much cost, you can have these high performance piece of hardware that our software can take advantage of and really accelerate playing back footage, rendering out frames, rendering out 3D sets or the compositions of the keyed footage and the backgrounds. And it just really sped up things. And that was great in itself, that we could now even be rendering at the same time on our editing system, as well as being able to work on it at the same time. But we wanted to even take things a step further, and we got a dedicated computer that has 3 GPUs in it to just be our dedicated rendering server, that we can just offload all our rendering to that one desktop computer and let it just plow away through anything we want to throw at it without inhibiting our performance and our editing computer at all, which really helps speed things up and get our workflow really streamlined.
So that's where things are moving to now.
It just moves so fast. It's amazing how fast the technology moves.
It always gets faster and better quality in much shorter time. So it's an exciting time to be making virtual content.
Some of the challenges in the early days of green screen were spill. You'd have from the green screen background, you'd have the clothes and the edges and the hair of
like a green
whatever
glow
you shoot, this
around
green glow and stuff,
hosts,
and that was hard to get rid of a few years ago.
Yeah,
back in the day, a few years ago. It's moving so fast, but now there's so many tools to make it easier. For example, to extract the green screen background, and nowadays you can almost wear green.
Yeah,
almost. It's getting to that point that your subject, your host, can wear green, and that was unheard of.
Been a no-no for a long time with green screen.
Yeah. Why shoot in 4K? I guess that's a question.
That's deep.
I mean, it's a news show, it's a talk show, so why bother shooting in 4K? ASC, the American Society of Cinematographers, they've got some articles looking at resolution. That was the resolution wars back in a few years ago. Every new camera had higher and higher resolution, and the perception is that a camera with higher resolution is going to give you a better image.
Right.
And that's not the case. The ASC did a tremendous series of tests with cameras that shot from 2K up to 11K, all kinds of half a dozen different cameras up to 11K. Mm-hmm. But when their when the images from those, when the footage, when the recording from those cameras is output at the same resolution, say HD or whatever, or 4K, it's extremely difficult to tell the difference between the camera that originally shot in 2K and the one that shot at 11K.
Right, and you have to keep in mind, even if something is shot on a high resolution, many people still only have 1080p monitors or like just 4K TVs
What?
are just now starting to become a popular thing, right?
Yeah.
Like that.
Depending on when you're watching this. 4K,
Yeah, maybe
what,
if
that's
you are
awesome.
down in the future, forgive us.
Well, 4K is becoming popular at this point,
At
and
this
some of
point,
the early
yeah.
adopters
That's
have
right.
4K TVs. So there you go. But again, back to the question: why shoot a talk show in 4K if there's virtually no perceptible difference? I mean, most cinema projectors, when you go to the cinema and watch a movie on a 50-foot screen, they're 2K projectors, or 4K projectors are now more popular. But a lot of cinemas are still projecting. Their digital projectors are 2K. It's a little
Right.
above HD. So why are we shooting in 4K? That's the question. I
Well,
guess.
for starters, when people can tell the difference in resolution, there's much greater difference that you can notice between 1080p and 4K because it's
Yeah.
4 times the pixels.
Right.
That then say anything above 4K, like a 4K and 8K image, you'd be hard pressed, even viewing it on an 8K screen,
Yes. Yeah.
to tell the difference between the two. Whereas 1080p and 4K, you can tell a difference. But beyond that, a huge advantage is when you're shooting on a green screen, the extra resolution can give you such a cleaner key, as we call it, which
Yeah.
just means the edges around your subject are much more defined because there's more pixels that you have that you're working with, which when you're keying out, which is extracting the green screen background, the software is looking for green pixels and within a threshold, and so if it has more pixels that it can run over and chop out, then it's a lot cleaner or a lot nicer of edges you get around your subjects.
Yeah.
And beyond that, we shoot quite wide, which
Yeah.
means that we're quite zoomed out.
So there's a creative aspect to
Right.
shooting in 4K. We can punch in and post.
That's right. So we have all this extra
there's flexibility.
resolution that we can reframe, we can punch in so we can get tighter camera shots, and we do that quite frequently.
Yeah. Yeah. So it was kind of in the early days. It was production and post-production in 4K and output in HD. Well, now we're outputting in 4K regularly.
Right,
And
yeah.
At this point, YouTube takes 4K.
Yep.
So it looks good.
Yeah. So if you have a 4K TV at home, watch it in 4K. Get the best experience.
Now, season 8 represented a return to basics. We kind of wanted to redo season 1. Season 1, they were hour-long shows that broadcasters prefer half an hour, so we did half-hour shows, and it was just the basics of creation evolution, the basic things that folks need to know, which was covered in season 1, and also we have a much higher quality image. The image was standard definition. It was dark and grainy and that kind of thing. So we wanted to sort of redo season 1, and we did that with season 8. Now with season 9, we actually moved studios. Now you noticed in the credits maybe that we've shot season 7 and 8 in Studio B. Now Studio A was the old Genesis Unleashed studio. the question was, well, why move if Studio B works? And why move out of Studio A? I guess that's the first question. And it's because Studio A only has an 8-foot ceiling, and Studio A was very limiting because of the 8-foot ceiling, just hanging lights and things and keeping them out of the shot. The intention was, the original intention was a physical set. So we'd have physical furniture in the set, not a virtual set. And to light that kind of a set, a physical set with an 8-foot ceiling, that would be extremely difficult, which is why we built Studio B. But then we were thinking of, actually, we're not shooting on a physical set. We're shooting on a virtual set. Could we, with the restriction of an 8-foot ceiling, could we light a green screen and build a green screen set in Studio A? And we thought, wow, there's some advantages to doing that, because Studio A was built partitioned off section in our warehouse. There's soundproofing in the walls. It's soundproof from the rest of the warehouse, because shooting season 7 and season 8, every time we wanted to shoot an episode, warehouse activity had to stop. And so we had to kind of schedule around warehouse activity and so on. It's also air conditioned. This Studio A was again closed off with soundproofing in the walls, so it's quiet, it's separate. But then what do you do with all the lights? The lights throw a lot of heat, and so we had some supporters of the ministry come in and build an air conditioning system with a little portable air conditioner, and the duct work is that pumps the air into Studio A. It's separated. There's a kind of a rubberized canvas section to the ductwork, so that the vibrations from the air conditioner don't travel through the ductwork into the studio. It's all quiet, so it can be air conditioned. The warehouse, so Studio B, isn't air conditioned in the summer. So shooting in the summer gets pretty toasty sometimes. In Studio A, again, it's a concrete ceiling. The offices are above, and there's soundproofing in here. Another advantage is we can use ceiling-mounted mics. We don't have to use lapel mics. With mic construction and so on, the smaller you make something, there's lapel mics. You try to make them as small as possible, but there's a compromise in sound quality there. So and also if you're wearing a lapel mic, you've got the wire running underneath your clothes and so on. If you move around a little bit, you can get rustling of the clothes and the fabric and so on. And so it's just much easier to have, for example, ceiling-mounted mics. You just walk on the set. The hosts don't need to get wired up. No more batteries in the transmitter and so on. It's just easy. And I always felt kind of bad about leaving Studio A. It was built so wonderfully, and we had these volunteers come in and do stuff. So it was actually a very comforting feeling getting back to Studio A. And so we're shooting season 9 in Studio A now. It's just great to be back in Studio A. teleprompters, yeah, that we began using originally up in Orangeville at the Bible Discovery TV studio. We used teleprompters up there, and with all of us getting older and living in a sin-cursed world, we needed to build teleprompters here. Initially, we tried just placing the monitor underneath the camera lens, so your eyes would be just a little bit off, and we'd have a monitor underneath the camera lens. But then when we punched in post, you get a tighter shot of the host, and you can see that the host's eyes are lower. They're not actually looking at the audience. They're lower. So that didn't work. And so it would have been nice if that's the simplest way to go, but it didn't work. So we had to build teleprompters. And again, that was a matter of research, just looking at DIY, all the do-it-yourself guys out there that are doing low-budget studios. And initially, we were thinking just using ordinary glass. That's ideal. Just use ordinary glass, but couldn't get that to work. There's a double image in the text that makes it hard to read then. But because of our deteriorating eyes, we built these teleprompters with 24-inch monitors. And so they're big teleprompters. And we did have to go with beam splitter glass. That's a loss of one stop. So beam splitter glass has some reflectivity in the glass so that as the monitor sits there, you can clearly see the text. It's meant for teleprompters. That's what it's for. There's other purposes as well, but that's its main use. The difficulty with that is in shooting through this glass, it has what you could call a tint to it, which means you lose light, which means you need more light on the set, which makes it hotter if you're not using LED lights. In Studio A, we're using LED lights now, which is very nice. But then you're playing with, okay, do we increase the shutter speed? Do we use a wider aperture? Well, there's problems with both of those, but we made it work with the teleprompter construction. How much of the content is original? Not a whole lot. That varies, actually. It varies by show.
Well, to write a show, we draw upon content from articles that have been prepared by our researchers and scientists from our offices all around the world. And those articles can take anywhere from days, weeks, or even months to create these articles. So we're majorly indebted to these people who do all this research. We get the fun part, just turning it into a little bit of a script. And I think the sort of part that we can take ownership is sort of putting it in our own words, but that's the easy part.
Some of the content is, articles that haven't been written yet, if you want to think of it that way. Or there's other sources for the content.
We draw heavily on articles in creation.com for the content, for the information. We've got thousands of articles written by scientists and other writers, and so we draw heavily on that research, but then we attempt to craft a script that sounds natural, that can be done in a dialogue. Certainly all the jokes are very much original, but most of the actual information content comes from creation.com.
If you click on the articles that are linked in the video, for example, on YouTube, we list the articles down below from which the content came. And if you read some of those articles, in a lot of cases, we're just copying and pasting. We're not trying to be original. This is just a video way of presenting the information where the research has already been done. We're not trying to reinvent the wheel here. We're taking the content that has already been peer-reviewed and taking that and putting it in a different medium. We have something that very few other creationist TV programs have, and that's the team of scientists and researchers at CMI, and those that work with CMI globally. It's not just like we try to work with the worldwide community of Bible-believing scientists and researchers. And it's not just those scientists and researchers on staff. We work with the global community. The great majority of the content for our shows comes from the articles written by those who've contributed to Creation Magazine, for example, or the Journal of Creation, or the website for the past 40 years. And so past articles are now online. You can use this content. I don't know if there's some filmmakers out there interested in creation, you can use the content on creation.com. Make your own shows. That's essentially what we're doing. We're using that content to make this show. So that's a tremendous. We're not doing the research ourselves. We're not reinventing the wheel here. The research has already been done. It just needs to be distributed. That's what we're doing with the show. What's your favorite episode? The one I'm currently working on.
I would say my favorite episode is, it would have been episode 6, that life was incredibly created by God. That just blows me away, the amount of design that is evident. And the more we learn about biology, the more we realize it couldn't possibly have arisen by accident. So topic-wise, certainly that's my favorite one.
I think I'd have to say my favorite episode was the one about dinosaurs in the Bible. I mean, a lot of people have questions about dinosaurs in general, and a lot of age groups, like everything from little kids are fascinated with dinosaurs, as well as adults. But it also addresses a big concern for a lot of people, which is, what is the age of the Earth, or how does this 65 million supposed year-old dinosaur fit into the Bible? So I think that's a neat episode that's kind of fun and addresses a lot of issues that people have.
What's my favorite episode? I'd say probably episode 6 of season 8, Life Incredibly Created by God, because we did a little fun animation with H. pylori getting hit by a car, and I had lots of fun making that, so that was probably one of my favorites. Plus, it's a good topic, too.
It changes all the time, but my favorite one is probably the Bible, Word of God or Word of Man. Either that or was Jesus wrong about creation? That one has to do with the deity of Christ, but the one about the Word of God, obviously it was written by men, but we call it the Word of God at CMI. Our main message behind all the creation evolution stuff is the authority of the Bible, and so that show, of all the shows we've done, that is the most foundational episode that we've done, and that's why I like it the most. Biggest challenge on set?
Sweat. Generally speaking, I am blessed with massive sweat glands, and so when it's humid or I'm under lights, my forehead starts glowing, and I have to get rid of that from time to time. So
the lights in Studio A are LED lights, but they weren't in Studio B. So we had a fan sitting off stage, blowing air across the host, because you'd be sitting under these essentially heat lamps. And in the summertime, with no air conditioning in the studio, it would just get hot, and we'd have to, be dabbing all the time so that we're not reflecting the whole set and all the lights in our skin. But and it was uncomfortable sometimes. So nice to get into Studio A where there's some air conditioning.
That's probably one of the biggest challenges for me. Between that and losing my place in the script.
Well, there's kind of two really important objectives on set, is to be able to read the teleprompter, but do it in such a way that you're reading ahead and speaking fairly natural. And then the other part is to sort of be able to interact with your co-host. And for me, those are almost like, sort of rubbing your stomach and patting your head. It's kind of, do you want me to do this one or that one? But I have trouble doing both at the same time.
Not laughing. I'm a type of person who laughs at everything, so I think there was like 20 bloopers or something for the episode, the one episode that I've done that I just couldn't keep it together.
Alex, looking at
Just go.
What? No, we were still this area. Sorry.
The biggest challenge on set is sometimes just keeping the energy up. Actually, that was more of a problem back when we were in Orangeville instead of season 7 and 8. We're in our own studio here, where we'll shoot one show a day instead of 6 shows a day. The 6 shows a day routine, that was, by the end of the day, you're just dragging, and it's like anything you need to do to, keep the energy up, and isn't this great, isn't this interesting, and that kind of thing. So keeping the energy up is sometimes difficult. And also sometimes we're in Studio B and there's noise. The HVAC system in the offices, sometimes we had to shut that off because it was squeaking and so on. The most memorable noises, I remember crows sitting on the roof of the building, and we'd be recording, and you can hear outside, it's a metal roof and that kind of thing. This crow going off, and we were like, okay, cut. Wait. Okay, is it gone? Okay, all right, let's do it again. No, it's not gone. There it is. No. So crows were probably the most memorable noise for me.
I would say, I think a phone rang one time, and we forgot to shut off the ringer. There might have been a doorbell, same thing. Or, you can't shut the world off entirely, so there'd be a truck or a vehicle backing up outside, and everything might be just going perfectly, and then all of a sudden there's this noise from the outside world, and we just have to stop and hope it goes away and do it again.
Well, I think of this one scenario where we're just about to start a new segment of the show, and of course the studio, it's kind of dark, and there's studio lighting and sort of all quiet on the set, and just as we're about to start, the mailman comes in, and it was almost like this guy, the poor guy, it was like he walked in through a backstage door in Hollywood, and he's on, in front of a live audience, and he was like, what did I do here? So I thought that was pretty funny.
My favorite part of doing the shows, oh man, that is probably a toss-up between the recording of the shows and writing the shows. Writing the shows is like just gathering the information. It's exciting to have information come together and to compose it in that way. So the writing aspects are exciting, and then recording the shows, just the interaction with the crew and the other host, and so that's fun too.
As the editor of the shows, I hear the content in the episodes over and over and over again. So that's really edifying to hear all this content quite a bit. But also, I just enjoy doing the animations and making the show as high quality as we can. I find great satisfaction in that, and hopefully it turned out pretty good.
I think my favorite part is you kind of step out of what you do on a daily basis, which in any organization can be, a little intense at times. There's a lot going on, and then we come to a day that we're going to do recording, and we kind of step out of our normal routine. And as we get into character, there's a lot of camaraderie and joking, and some of that you can see in the bloopers or in a behind-the-scenes kind of episode like this. But I enjoy that time with working with the production team.
I do enjoy the process of recording and some of the banter that goes back and forth. I do rather enjoy that. Sometimes it's a little tedious, but that's certainly, I would say that's the highlight for me of the whole process, is actually doing the recording in front of the camera.
Yeah, so I think it was a few years back, I was learned of a news story that was sort of surprising to me, which was kind of like Google has been, dethroned as the search engine, the top search engine out there. And I'm like, what? How could anybody beat Google? Well, it was actually owned by Google, but it was YouTube. People are actually searching more for videos at that point. We sort of reached a tipping point where they're searching more for videos than for text on websites. So it just shows the importance of videos. I think we all know that. People love to watch little video clips. So it allows us to get out like a very important message, but get it out in a medium that people are anxious to consume. So I think that's the power of using video.
I guess the value of these shows to the church and to the world of apologetics is that in this area of apologetics, you could consider creation evolution. a subset of apologetics in general. Apologetics is giving a reasoned defense for the Christian faith. That's what apologetics is all about. And in this area of apologetics for biblical creation, there is a huge amount of information, huge amount of evidence available nowadays. These last 4.5 decades or so, have seen a massive increase in the amount of focus and research that's been done on Genesis and the creation evolution issue. And the value of taking all of that research and putting it into these shows that people can just click on and watch all around the world, that's incredibly valuable for apologetics, for the church, to build up Christians in their faith. A lot of people have questions about Genesis. A lot of people have questions. And I would say that's the value of these videos. It's strengthening, building the church, building people up in their faith. They're tremendously valuable in that sense.
I think it's good to do videos in particular because people learn in different ways. Some people are more visual learners, but also when you have like a YouTube video, people can come back rather than like just hearing a presentation once, and which is great. But people can forget what they've heard. But with a video, it's online. People can go back and hear it over and over again. People can play it while they're washing dishes or, whatever they're doing, and just rehear all the content that are in these shows and the great facts that support creation in the Bible. And I think you also reach a wider audience when you're doing videos that people who wouldn't necessarily come to an event at a church or, that are in a country where there isn't a CMI office per se or something, that people, either videos or articles that are online can be accessible to them as well.
Well, this goes back to the whole reason why I came to work at CMI to start with, is that I came to realize from watching a speaker that it really is important to be able to defend biblical creation, that Genesis really does need to be real history in order for the gospel to make sense. A lot of people don't really think through it that way and realize that if Adam is not a historical Adam, that if the Noah's flood did not actually happen, that other things in the Bible don't make sense. And so the whole death before sin argument really impacted me. And there's a lot of folks that just don't think about it. They go through school believing evolution is fact, it's science, it's been proven, and maybe based on some faulty arguments that have since been discredited, and they don't realize that. And so I do believe that it is a good idea for us to be able to defend what Genesis says with some scientific evidence as well. Just get people realizing the Bible really is true.
How can these videos help with evangelism? A lot of evangelists have told us that the questions they run, street evangelists for example, the questions that they run into, a lot of those questions, when you give a gospel presentation, you're talking about Christ and what he did to save people from their sins, and a lot of the resistance to that is questions about dinosaurs, creation, science. What about science? What about evolution? Doesn't evolution invalidate your Christianity? You're saying God created? Well, no, that's not true, because we all know that we evolved from pond scum. Happy thought, but these kinds of objections come up very, very frequently. And so these videos can help with evangelism. If you're out there evangelizing, and all of us should do more of that anyway, watch some of these basic videos, like Season 8, for example. And it's not just evangelism. They're very valuable for spiritual growth. All of us have doubts or questions, again, about those tensions that are in Scripture there. What about this? How do we understand this? And so on. A lot of people have questions about those events in Genesis. Or even if you don't have questions, if you've never thought about how dinosaurs fit into the Bible, or where came God as wife, or the age of the earth, or how did Noah get all those animals on the ark, even if you've never thought about those, if you read an article or watch a video that we've done answering that question, well, now you've been presented with a question and you have the answer. So you've just learned something about God's word. Oh yeah, I never really had this question, but now I can see how that works out, and it builds faith in the accuracy of Scripture.
Well, the neat thing about these videos is although they're broadcast on stations all over the world, they're also available on YouTube and also on our media center at creation.com. So they're always available to be able to do research, whether it's people ourselves who are in ministry and preparing presentations or talks or pastors, but just for any person who's a Bible-believing Christian can go and be able to find answers at any time, and that is extremely valuable.
I think in terms of evangelism, videos can really help because they're so shareable, right? Like with the internet and everything online these days, and everyone has devices that can play YouTube and connect to the to the internet, that people can just share a link quickly and, hey, have you looked at this? Hey, here's an answer to your question, and it's a great way to reach people. Friends and family, as well as people you don't know. You can just share these videos on social media, and people can hear the truth of God's Word, and that science does support the Bible, and it's a great tool in that sense for evangelism, but also for spiritual growth. The more people can get into the Word and grow in their faith, the better, right? And so you have more opportunity. It's not just a Sunday morning thing. You can hear them throughout the week and be encouraged in your faith and continue to grow spiritually.
Well, that goes along with the whole idea of being able to defend justice. I've heard that homeschoolers use these, for example. It's they're topical, and you can dig into a subject without having to read an in-depth book. You can watch a video on a particular topic, say about Noah's flood or dinosaurs, and certainly helps in spiritual growth to be able to trust the Bible wholeheartedly with your whole mind, and in evangelism as well. Some people maybe don't want to read an article, or we're not always all that good at explaining the arguments ourselves. So, hey, I'm just going to send you a link to a video that you might find interesting, and you can read the quotes, you can listen to the host speak on this particular topic, and then we can dialogue about that afterwards. We certainly live in a world that is very much online, very much video-oriented, so videos are becoming more and more important.
The teleprompters, well, yeah, I've been using them a number of years, but no, I don't mind the teleprompters. I like that we're not doing this and looking at notes, which is what we used to do before the teleprompters. You'd read some notes, and then you'd look up at the audience and you'd try to, say it as though you haven't just read it. But with the teleprompters, it's just it's so much easier. You just imagine, okay, I'm talking to a person on the other side of the camera. And so, no, I don't really have a love-hate relationship with the teleprompters. They're great tools.
Yeah, so of course the teleprompter, the words are moving at all times and you're following them as they go. And, that's pretty straightforward as long as you don't read something wrong. But what always gets me is when we have to switch to a different camera and we have cues in the teleprompter to say, time to, camera number 2. And my whole challenge is as, it's scrolling down, of course, where it is, by the time I look at this camera, it's moved, and so I got to find the line. And it's one of these things that's kind of like, it'd probably be easy if you just did it, but I'm thinking as it's scrolling, oh no, I got to change cameras, it's like, don't think of a purple elephant, and you can't help but do it.
Well, that depends. Are you referring to the one time I actually ran the teleprompter from the other side and I had to read the text upside down and backwards? Because that was rather a challenge. But usually on set, I can usually follow the text reasonably well. Sometimes it goes a little too quick and I can't find my spot. Most likely it's because I forget which camera I'm supposed to be looking at. And I lose the text entirely.
I don't like operating it. It's a bit difficult because it's almost like a dance with the host, that you can't go too fast or too slow, that you have to find that right, like where they're trying to like emphasize and slow down, or where they're trying to, make up time
that you have to kind of follow their lead there, and plus you're reading it backwards in the system we're using too, so it's a bit tricky that way. But from my experience using the teleprompter on the other side of things, it's been pretty good. So it is a bit of a love-hate relationship. Yes, I am looking forward to using the new studio in Season 9 because we used to have to do a lot of work on the audio just to get rid of this warehouse-sounding reverb and a bunch of noise, like and subtle noises too. If we didn't have a good take without a truck backing up or something, we would just have to do quite a bit of audio work. So I'm looking forward to the better soundproofing in our new studio that hopefully won't need to do nearly as much work, and hopefully the audio quality will be better too. And it will just make shooting easier too, that we don't need to close down the warehouse and make as big of a deal of it as in the past, that we can just come into our own space here and just start recording.
Well, one thing I appreciate about the new studio is that in the old studio, we used to have lapel mics, and I'd find when we go to read quotes, I would sort of look down, and all of a sudden my voice level would be different. And so then we would try to sort of look down, but sort of more with your eyes, and it was a little bit tricky with all the other things we're thinking about. And to be able to have a much better setup with the microphones, be able to pick up the sound in a more effective way without the levels varying so much, that's going to make it a lot easier for recording the show.
Oh, yeah. I think the new studio is going to be great. It's sectioned off with soundproofed walls from the rest of our warehouse in Kitchener there. And so we don't have the audio challenges. In addition, there is a custom designed air conditioning unit. So the warehouse has no air conditioning. So in the summer in Southern Ontario, it does get pretty sticky sometimes. And then with the intense lighting, I mean, we have LED lights in the new studio, so that is another blessing. You can put your hand a foot from these LED lights, and they're very bright, but there's no heat. You try doing that with the other lights that we had in the other studio, and your hand would start to get a nice sunburn after a while. No, but there's a lot of heat that those things throw out, and then you end up getting sweaty, and it causes other problems and so on. But yeah, we can come down here, and that also means that the warehouse operation, shipping and that kind of thing, parcels can go out to customers without having to have everybody quiet and not to completely cancel all warehouse activity. That can continue while we're recording. So there's a lot of advantages to the new studio. Looking forward to it.
Absolutely. I want to see what it's like to be able to go into a studio that has better soundproofing than what we had before. Hopefully we won't be bothered by those telephones ringing. Hopefully people will be able to use washrooms, etc., out in other parts of the building, even during recording. So yeah, I'm excited to see how that goes. Yeah, the problem with using the washrooms is as soon as you hear water running or a toilet flushing, you can hear it in the studio because there's no soundproofing where that is.
We had a recording sign to let the staff know. We have a little wireless transmitter that enables this recording light so that the staff would know, okay, see the printer and photocopier is out in the warehouse area. And so they couldn't print anything, otherwise that would get picked up there. And even things like, I don't know if we should say this, but even going to the washroom and flushing the toilet would be loud. And so that we'd have to, okay, just everybody hold off when the recording light is on, and when it's off, when we're kind of between takes and so on, then there was a mad scramble to get to the washrooms.
So one of my side jobs on the set has always been to use this little remote to turn the recording on-air light on, so people in other parts of the office know that we're in recording, which means, of course, they have to avoid using the washroom during that time. The challenge is giving them occasionally enough opportunity to get in and out of there before recording again, and end up being the one getting criticized for that sometimes. Oh, you only gave us 30 seconds of time. So.
Oh, yeah.
My favorite blooper.
Oh, I know.
So I was midway through one of the segments once, and it was about teaching in high school, and the script was actually talking about being careful of the evidences that are being presented for evolution in high school, and I literally said the exact opposite word. Yeah, now here's the key. Nearly all of the supposed evidence for creation you're likely to be shown in science class falls into zone 2.
Zone 2, yeah.
So yeah, it couldn't have been any worse word I substituted.
There's this wonderful entrance that Matt and I did. I believe it was in episode 6, in fact, of season 8, where we come in and there's a couple of lines back and forth about evolution, and we just didn't get the timing right. We were trying to take the right number of steps, land on the right mark. It's like walking and chewing gum at the same time. And so we had to do take after take after take, because every time we messed up something. We got too close, or I think he was supposed to interrupt me, and that didn't happen. And so those are the fun ones, where we keep messing up over and over and over again.
Did life evolve, or was it created by or was it created by some intelligent designer? And you didn't jump in, man. Did life evolve, or was it created by God?
It was created.
We got to do this again because we're rubbing shoulders. Did life evolve, or was it created by God?
It was created. Don't upload this. That's funny because I was trying to count my steps. I forgot my line.
Michael Caine, man, Michael Caine. Created by God.
It was created. Okay, what do we need to fix? I don't get much better than that. I'll let that Richard in the middle. It was created. Was that good?
I like that. I kind of like that one.
I don't know, in the season 7 bloopers, the editor put together all the areas where I was coughing. I had a throat thing back then where I had to cough throughout the day and so on, and he edited all those things together.
Okay, fair enough.
Well, let's try segment 2.
And I just thought that was hilarious, the way it was put together. So, yeah, my favorite blooper is me coughing, I guess.
This was, I think, all the way back in season 5. My favorite blooper was when we pulled a prank on the hosts when we were just starting to use the teleprompter. Me and the other people in the control room in Orangeville decided we'd switch a few words around. Instead of the teleprompter saying Mark Twain, we made it say Shania Twain, and instead of the Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, we put the Adventures of Shania Twain, and the host read it off without missing a beat.
This is the extreme version of blind faith.
Right.
It's blind faith on steroids, basically. You know, Shania Twain, the famous author and humorist who wrote The Adventures of Shania Twain, had a
cut.
What the heck?
We did that eventually.
Instead of Mark.
I was thinking,
nice.
Is that the autocorrect doing that? What in the world?
Nice, because I just read Mark.
We were just dying laughing, and it was hilarious.
My acting philosophy is sit up straight, don't slouch, try and deliver the content as though you've just discovered these truths yourself and you're excited about them. Deliver the content with enthusiasm. That's basically it. And the enthusiasm is contagious. If you're just monologuing, you're just delivering data to the viewers, and you're just, here's this and then this and then this and 1 + 1 = 2, and you're just sort of delivering it without enthusiasm. It's gonna impact the viewers.
Well, when you're on screen in nonfiction kind of scenario, you're not really acting like an actor would be to try and, put themselves in character in some situation that you're not involved in. This is truth and reality. So the biggest thing, of course, is believing what you're speaking. And that's important for me to have a conviction, because I don't think if I don't believe it myself, there's no way the audience is going to believe what I'm saying.
The future of Creation Magazine Live would be nice if we had even more broadcasters. I mean, we have there's plenty of broadcasters now, and of course the internet. I'm talking about TV broadcasters. Just more distribution, and that's an area of prayer. We don't have the money to pay for distribution, so at this point, all of our distributors, all of the networks that do carry the show, don't charge us for it. So, but there's limits to how much of that a network can do. I mean, they have expenses too, they need to pay the bills, and so they do have flexibility to have some shows that they're not charging the producers for. And so we're very grateful for those networks that do carry the show, but it would always be nice to have more distribution, right? So that's, that's an area of prayer. And just increased great content. Viewers have remarked about the content. They enjoy the content of the show, and fortunately our source of content is very rich. We have a rich source of great content, so my hope for the future is that it continues along the same lines that it has, that we continue to deliver great content to the viewers.
Well, one of the things we're planning with season 9 is that every episode will be divisible into 2 parts, so that if you go on YouTube, you can now find a 10 or 15 minute video on a topic, as opposed to something that's 25 minutes long. People generally, myself included, when I'm online, I'm more likely to watch a shorter video than a full half hour. So I'm looking forward to that, seeing how we can develop the shows as a half-hour show, but also being able to have it in 2 parts for YouTube videos. It presents a little bit of a challenge for writing, of course, but I really do hope that we get more of an audience outside of Creationist circles from YouTube and other social media.
I hope more people will see it, more people will be encouraged, and that it'll reach more of an audience around the world, and that just continue along the path that we have been going in, defending God's word, proclaiming God's word, and showing that you can believe in science and in Scripture.
When you think about all the research that's been done in to create articles or material upon which the shows are based, and again, it could be extensive amount of research done, and then the writing that's involved, and the filming, the post-production, all the work that's involved, there's so much important truth in these episodes, and they're so powerful. As I would just like to see it, I'd like to see it reach a much broader audience, and people to get really behind the fact of these are very valuable pieces of material that can be used for evangelism purposes. And I'd like to see really that reach the masses so that more people can be affected with the gospel message.
Yeah, the way we can produce so many shows over so many years, this series, it's Canadian donors. Really, that's a big part of it. Canadian donors, and the initial philosophy of trying to produce ongoing shows at minimal cost and with minimal personnel, to try to have the fewest number of people involved, and have and do it at minimal cost, and do it on an ongoing basis. It's Canadian donors that make that happen. So we're not doing, it's not like a project, right? We're going to do this movie or this documentary or something, and we'll have a fundraiser where there's this peak in fundraising. Fundraisers can be a lot of fun. Fundraisers are fun because everybody feels like they're a part of the team, right? You send out these letters, hey, we're gonna do this project and get behind us, and you have the thermometer thing going with the monthly contributions or whatever, and those can be a lot of fun. But that's not what we're doing here. This is ordinary, regular donations from many people contributing, often not very large amounts, but it's just on a regular basis. It's the regular donation income that we get at CMI Canada here that makes the ongoing production of the show possible.
we're always blown away by the generosity of our donors in Canada, and it's amazing to think of what you are accomplishing in the greater kingdom of God through this ministry and through your support. So thank you so much.
Just want to thank especially Canadian supporters for your support over many years. And you can see in this documentary how the show has progressed from simple to it's not simple to complex, but as far as quality, the quality has improved, and we strive for a quality show given the budget that we have. I mean, it's low budget filmmaking. That's what this is. But your support has enabled us to get this content out at a massive rate. Here with 8 seasons, over 180 shows, half-hour episodes. That's a huge amount of content that's now out there. It's on the internet. It's been broadcast on TV broadcast networks around the world. And without your support, we wouldn't have a studio. We wouldn't be able to make these things. We'd have to. Our media department would be very small, and we just wouldn't be able to do it. So thank you for your support over these many years. It makes this show and everything that CMI does possible.